The hot steam from the industrial dishwasher hit David's face as he loaded another rack of greasy plates. It was 11:30 p.m., and Tony's Italian kitchen was finally winding down after another busy Friday night. His hands, wrinkled from hours in hot soapy water, moved automatically as he scraped leftover pasta and sauce from the endless stream of dishes. "Hey, David, you can clock out after this last batch," called Maria, the night manager, as she counted the register. David nodded, grateful that his 12-hour shift was almost over. At 32 years old, he had been washing dishes at Tony's for almost 3 years, making $12 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was steady work, and in a city like Chicago, steady work meant everything. As he hung up his apron and grabbed his worn-out jacket from the break room, David's phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Lisa, his wife of 4 years. His stomach tightened. Late-night calls from Lisa usually meant one thing: another fight about money. The 20-minute bus ride home gave him time to prepare for what was waiting. Through the foggy windows, he watched the city lights blur past and tried to think of something positive to tell Lisa about his day. Maybe he could mention that Tony had said business was picking up, or that Maria had complimented his speed with the dinner rush. But deep down he knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing he said these days seemed to make Lisa happy. Their small studio apartment felt even smaller when David walked in at midnight. Lisa was sitting on their second-hand couch, arms crossed, still wearing her work clothes from her job at the insurance office. Her face had that look, the one that meant trouble. "Do you know what happened today?" Lisa started, not even looking up from her phone. "My coworker Jennifer asked what my husband does for work. And you know what I had to tell her? That my husband washes dishes for a living." David set his keys down quietly on the kitchen counter. They had been through this conversation so many times he could practically recite both sides. "Lisa, we've talked about this. It's honest work and I'm looking for something better." "Are you?" Lisa stood up, her voice getting louder. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're perfectly happy scrubbing other people's leftover food for the rest of your life. Jennifer's husband just got promoted to regional manager at his company. They're buying a house next month." "A house, David?" "And here we are, 32 years old, living in a studio apartment because my husband makes $12 an hour." The words stung, but David had learned to keep his emotions in check during these fights. Getting angry would only make things worse. "I know it's not ideal, but I'm saving money. I'm learning about the restaurant business. Maybe someday I could—" "Someday?" Lisa interrupted. "Someday what? Become a dishwasher at a fancier restaurant? Face it, David, this is all you'll ever be. You don't have a college degree. You don't have any real skills. All you know how to do is clean up other people's mess." David felt something break inside his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "That's not fair, Lisa. You knew who I was when you married me. I've been working hard, picking up extra shifts whenever I can. Working hard at a dead-end job." Lisa threw her hands up in frustration. "My brother-in-law makes 6 figures selling software. My friend Amy's husband owns his own accounting firm. And what do I get? A husband who comes home every night smelling like grease and dishwater." The apartment fell silent except for the sound of their upstairs neighbor's TV. David looked around their tiny living space. The fold-out couch that served as their bed, the kitchen table they had bought at a garage sale, the single window that faced the brick wall of the building next door. He knew Lisa was embarrassed by their life. He was too sometimes, but hearing it said out loud, hearing the disappointment in her voice cut deeper than he expected. "I'm trying my best, Lisa," he said quietly. "Well, your best isn't good enough," she shot back. "I'm 29 years old. I should be planning a family, buying furniture, thinking about kids. Instead, I'm worried about whether we can afford groceries next week. Do you know how that feels? To be afraid to look at our bank account?" David did know how it felt. He checked their account balance obsessively, calculating every expense, choosing between bus fare and lunch, making one bag of rice last for a week. But he also knew that Lisa spent money they didn't have, on clothes, on expensive coffee, on dinners out with friends that he couldn't afford to join. "Maybe if we both made some changes," he started. "Don't you dare try to make this about me." Lisa's eyes flashed with anger. "I have a real job. I wear business clothes and sit in meetings. I contribute something meaningful to society." "What do you contribute?" "Clean plates?" The cruelty in her voice surprised him. They had been growing apart for months, but this felt different. This felt like the end of something. "You're right," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am just a dishwasher." "But I'm your husband. Doesn't that count for anything?" Lisa's expression softened for just a moment, and David thought he saw a flicker of the woman he had fallen in love with. But then she turned away, crossing her arms again. "I can't do this anymore, David. I can't keep pretending that love is enough when we can barely pay rent. I can't keep making excuses to my friends and family about why my husband has no ambition." That night, after Lisa had gone to bed on the couch, David lay on the thin mattress they had put on the floor and stared at the ceiling. He listened to the sounds of the city outside, sirens, cars, the occasional shout from the street below. Everything Lisa had said was true. He was just a dishwasher. He didn't have a college degree or special skills. Their bank account was always close to empty. But as he lay there in the dark, something else was true too. Every day at Tony's, he watched and learned. He saw how the kitchen operated, how orders flowed from servers to cooks to his station. He noticed which dishes came back barely touched and which plates were scraped completely clean. He heard customers talking about their favorite meals and their complaints. He understood food costs because he saw the invoices. He knew which nights were busy and which were slow. Most importantly, he had ideas. Ideas about better ways to organize the kitchen, about dishes that would cost less but taste better, about service that would make customers want to come back. Ideas that he kept to himself because who would listen to a dishwasher? As sleep finally came, David made a decision. Lisa was right about one thing. He couldn't stay a dishwasher forever. But she was wrong about another thing. This wasn't all he would ever be. He just had to figure out how to prove it, not just to her, but to himself. Tomorrow he would start paying attention in a different way. Not just as someone cleaning up after the real action, but as someone studying every detail of how a restaurant really worked. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to become more than just the guy who washed the dishes. The invitation came on expensive cardstock paper, printed with gold lettering. Lisa's insurance company was throwing their annual holiday party at the downtown Marriott, and spouses were invited. David held the invitation in his dishpan hands, reading it for the third time. "You have to come," Lisa said, adjusting her earrings in their cracked bathroom mirror. "It would look weird if I showed up alone. Everyone brings their husband." David looked down at his only dress shirt bought from a thrift store 2 years ago. The collar was slightly frayed and it had never fit quite right. "I don't know, Lisa, these work parties. Your coworkers and their husbands, they're not really my crowd." "That's exactly the problem." Lisa turned to face him, her lipstick perfect despite their dim lighting. "You need to meet successful people. See how they talk, how they carry themselves. Maybe it'll inspire you to want something more." The Marriott ballroom was everything David expected and more. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over tables covered in white linens. Men in expensive suits talked loudly about their golf games and vacation homes. Women in cocktail dresses laughed at jokes that David couldn't quite catch from across the room. Lisa introduced him to her coworkers with the same tone someone might use to explain an embarrassing family secret. "This is my husband, David. He works in food service." "Oh, are you a chef?" asked Jennifer, the coworker Lisa always mentioned. Her husband stood beside her in a suit that probably cost more than David made in a month. "Actually, Lisa started. "I work in a restaurant kitchen," David interrupted, trying to save them both some embarrassment. "That's interesting." Jennifer's husband extended his hand. "I'm Robert." "Which restaurant?" "Maybe we've eaten there." "Tony's Italian Kitchen," David replied. "It's a smaller place, nothing fancy." "And what do you do there exactly?" Robert asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. David felt every eye at their table turn toward him. The music seemed to get quieter. Even the waiters appeared to slow down as they walked past. Lisa's face had gone pale, and she was staring at her wine glass like it might save her. "I'm a dishwasher," David said quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Robert nodded politely and mumbled something about how restaurants need good people in every position. Jennifer suddenly found her phone very interesting. Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Well," said another woman at the table, "that's honest work." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward small talk and pitying glances. David watched Lisa shrink into herself, speaking only when spoken to, her earlier confidence completely gone. When people asked what she did for work, she answered in short sentences, none of her usual pride showing through. The drive home was silent until they were 3 blocks from their apartment. "I can't do this anymore," Lisa said, staring out the passenger window. "Lisa, no, I mean it. I can't keep living like this. Did you see how they looked at me? Like I was some kind of charity case who married the janitor." David pulled into their parking spot behind their building. The car made a grinding noise as he turned it off. Another problem they couldn't afford to fix. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know tonight was hard for you." Lisa turned to face him and her eyes were filled with tears. But they weren't sad tears. They were angry ones? Hard for me? "David, do you understand what just happened in there? I work with these people every day. I have to sit in meetings with Jennifer knowing that she knows my husband washes dishes for $12 an hour. I have to pretend that's okay. Maybe it doesn't have to be okay," David said, surprising himself with his words. "Maybe I need to change things. Change things how? You've been saying that for 3 years. 3 years of maybe someday and I'm looking into it and things will get better. Well, guess what? They haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse." Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the cold air between them. David had been expecting this moment for weeks, maybe months, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the stomach. "Lisa, please, give me one more chance. Give me until New Year's, that's 6 weeks. If I can't figure out a way to make real money by then, if I can't show you that I'm serious about changing our life, then okay." Lisa looked at him for a long moment. 6 weeks? What are you going to do in 6 weeks that you haven't done in 3 years? "I don't know yet," David admitted, "but I'll figure it out." The next morning, David arrived at Tony's an hour early. He had never been in the restaurant before it opened, and the quiet felt strange after years of constant noise and chaos. He used his key to let himself in through the back door and stood in the empty kitchen, really looking at it for the first time. The industrial stoves, the walk-in cooler, the prep stations, everything had a purpose, a place in the system that he had watched but never truly understood. He walked to his dishwashing station and looked at it from a different angle. From here, he could see the entire kitchen operation. The expo station where plates got their final touches. The line where orders came together. The pass where servers picked up their table's food. "You're early," a voice said behind him. David turned to see Carlos, the head chef, unlocking the walk-in cooler. Carlos was 45 years old, had worked in restaurants since he was 16, and knew more about food than anyone David had ever met. "Couldn't sleep," David said. "Mind if I ask you something?" Carlos shrugged, pulling out containers of prepped vegetables. "Shoot, how did you become a chef? I mean, what was your first step?" Carlos looked at him with new interest. "You thinking about moving up from the dish pit?" "Maybe. I'm just trying to understand how all this works. The whole business, not just my part of it." Carlos set down the containers and leaned against the prep counter. "You want to know the truth? Most people who work in restaurants never learn the business. They learn their station, their job, and that's it. But the ones who make it, the ones who open their own places or become managers or executive chefs, they learn everything." "Everything?" "Food costs, profit margins, what customers actually want versus what they say they want, how to manage inventory without wasting money, how to schedule staff so you're not overpaying for slow nights, how to make people want to come back." Carlos grabbed an onion and started dicing it with quick, practiced movements. Most importantly, they understand that every single person who walks through that door is paying our salaries. Every plate that goes out represents someone's hard-earned money. David absorbed this information like a sponge. Would you mind if I stayed after my shifts sometimes? To watch and learn?" Carlos stopped cutting and looked at him seriously. "You really want to do this? Because it's not just about learning to cook. It's about understanding people, understanding money, understanding pressure. Most people can't handle it. I want to try." Carlos nodded slowly. "Okay, but you do your dishwashing job first and you do it right. Then if there's time, I'll show you some things. Deal?" "Deal." That night, after the last plate was washed and the last customer had left, David stayed. Carlos showed him how to break down a chicken, how to make the restaurant's signature marinara sauce, and most importantly, how to calculate food costs down to the penny. "This chicken costs us $3.50, Carlos explained, pointing to the portions he had cut. "We serve it with pasta that costs maybe 80 cents. vegetables that cost 60 cents and bread that cost 40 cents. Total food cost $5.30. We sell it for $18. You know what that means? David did the math in his head. We make $12.70 profit? Before labor, rent, utilities, insurance, and about 50 other expenses, Carlos nodded. But yeah, that's the idea. Except most restaurants fail because they don't understand these numbers. They think if food tastes good, money will follow. But taste is only half the equation. David went home that night with his head spinning with new information. He found an old notebook in their junk drawer and started writing down everything Carlos had taught him. Food costs, menu pricing, customer preferences he had observed during his 3 years of watching from the dish pit. For the first time in months, maybe years, David felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone drowning and grabbing for anything that floated by, but the solid hope of someone with a plan. Lisa was already asleep when he got home, but he could see she had been packing. A suitcase sat open on their dresser, half filled with her clothes. The sight of it should have scared him, but instead it fueled his determination. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to prove that he was more than just a dishwasher. 6 weeks to show Lisa, and more importantly himself, that he could build something better than the life they were living. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, Week 1. Then he began planning the most important 6 weeks of his life. The small storefront had been empty for 8 months. David walked past it every day on his way to work, watching the for lease sign fade in the window. It was tiny, maybe 20 feet wide with enough space for 12 tables at most. The previous tenant had been a dry cleaner that went out of business when the owner retired. David pressed his face against the dusty glass and tried to imagine it differently. Tables with checkered tablecloths. The smell of garlic and oregano instead of stale air. Customers laughing over plates of food that he had cooked with his own hands. You're dreaming again, he whispered to himself. But for the first time in years, his dreams felt possible. It was week 4 of his 6-week deadline, and David had been learning everything Carlos could teach him. His notebook was filled with recipes, cost calculations, and observations about what customers loved most at Tony's. More importantly, he had been saving every penny he could, eating nothing but rice and beans, walking to work instead of taking the bus, cutting every corner imaginable. His bank account showed $2,947. Not much for most people, but for David it represented 3 years of sacrifice and hope. That evening, he called his older brother Kevin, who lived in Milwaukee and worked construction. You want to borrow money to open a restaurant? Kevin's voice crackled through David's cheap phone. Dave, do you know how many restaurants fail in the first year? I know it's risky, David said, pacing around their tiny apartment while Lisa watched TV with the volume deliberately loud. But Kevin, I've been learning. I understand food costs, customer service, inventory management. I'm not going into this blind. How much are you talking about? $3,000. Combined with what I have saved, it might be enough to lease the space and buy basic equipment. There was a long pause. Dave, I love you, but $3,000 is a lot of money for me. What does Lisa think about this crazy idea? David looked over at Lisa, who had turned up the TV even louder. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That sounds like she hates it. She doesn't understand yet. But she will. Another pause. You know what? You've never asked me for anything, ever. If you really think you can do this, I'll help you out. But if this goes south, you pay me back, even if it takes you 20 years. Deal? Deal. David hung up the phone, feeling like his heart might burst out of his chest. He turned to Lisa, who was pointedly ignoring him. Lisa, I need to tell you something. She muted the TV and looked at him with tired eyes. Let me guess. Another great plan to change our lives? I'm going to open a restaurant. Lisa stared at him for 10 seconds, then burst out laughing. Not happy laughing. The kind of laughing that cuts deep and leaves scars. A restaurant? You, David, you wash dishes. You don't own restaurants. You don't even eat at nice restaurants. I've been learning from Carlos. I know more about the business now than you think. Learning from Carlos. Lisa stood up, her voice getting higher. Carlos makes $15 an hour as a line cook. If he knew how to run a successful restaurant, don't you think he'd have his own place instead of working for Tony? David felt his confidence waver, but he pushed forward. I have a business plan. I've calculated the costs, the profit margins, everything. I found a small space that I can afford to lease. With what money? Lisa crossed her arms. We can barely afford this apartment. I've been saving. And Kevin is going to lend me some money. You called your brother? You asked your brother for money to fund your ridiculous fantasy without even talking to me first? Lisa, please. Just listen to my plan. No. Lisa walked to their bedroom, which was really just the corner of their studio with a curtain hung around it, and emerged with the suitcase she had been packing. I'm done listening to your plans. I'm done waiting for you to grow up and face reality. Where are you going? My sister's apartment. She said I could stay there until I figure things out. Lisa zipped up the suitcase with sharp, angry motions. You want to throw away the little money we have on some impossible dream? Fine, do it without me. Lisa, wait. We said 6 weeks. It's only been 4. She stopped at the door and looked back at him. You know what the saddest part is? You actually think this will work. You actually believe that David Rodriguez, the dishwasher, is going to become some kind of restaurant owner. It's pathetic. The door slammed behind her and David was alone. For the first time in 4 years of marriage, the apartment was completely quiet. No TV, no arguments, no sound of Lisa sighing disapprovingly at everything he did. Just silence and the distant noise of traffic outside. David sat on their second-hand couch and opened his notebook. Page after page of recipes, cost calculations, and business ideas. All the work he had done over the past month seemed to mock him in the empty apartment. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe he was being ridiculous. But then he thought about Carlos, who had been teaching him every night after the restaurant closed. Carlos believed in him. And Kevin, who had never lent money to anyone, was willing to bet $3,000 on his little brother's dream. Most importantly, he thought about the look on Lisa's face at the holiday party. The shame and embarrassment that had followed them home like a shadow. He never wanted to feel that small again. The next morning, David called the landlord of the empty storefront. 3 weeks later, Dave's Kitchen opened its doors for the first time. The restaurant was everything David had imagined and nothing like he had expected. The 12 tables were mismatched, bought from a restaurant supply store that was going out of business. The kitchen was so small that David could touch both walls with his arms stretched out. He was the cook, server, cashier, and dishwasher all at once. For the first 2 weeks, some days had 0 customers. Other days, maybe 3 or 4 people wandered in, mostly neighbors who were curious about the new place. David's savings disappeared quickly, and Kevin's loan was running out faster than he had planned. On a particularly slow Tuesday afternoon, with only 1 customer in the restaurant, David seriously considered closing down and admitting defeat. He was exhausted, financially broke, and starting to wonder if Lisa had been right all along. But that same Tuesday evening, something changed everything. A young woman with a camera came in just before closing time. She ordered David's specialty dish, something he called comfort mac and cheese, which was regular mac and cheese elevated with slow-cooked short rib, caramelized onions, and a touch of truffle oil that Carlos had taught him to use sparingly. The woman ate in silence, taking photos of her food from different angles. David assumed she was just someone who liked to photograph her meals. A lot of people did that these days. This is incredible, she said when she was finished. I'm Amanda Chen. I write a food blog called Hidden Gems Chicago. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? David's heart started racing. He had heard of Amanda's blog. It was small but had a dedicated following of people who loved discovering new restaurants. You're the owner? Amanda asked, pulling out a small recording device. Owner, chef, server, and dishwasher, David said, trying to make a joke but speaking the absolute truth. Tell me about this dish. Where did you learn to make it? I worked in restaurant kitchens for years, David said carefully. I learned that the best comfort food takes familiar flavors and makes them just a little bit special. The short rib takes 8 hours to cook, but it's worth it. The truffle oil is just a hint, enough to make people wonder what makes it taste so good. Amanda smiled. And what made you decide to open your own place? David thought about Lisa, about the holiday party, about 3 years of washing dishes while dreaming of something more. I guess I got tired of just watching other people chase their dreams. Amanda's review went live 3 days later. The headline read, Former dishwasher turns tiny storefront into comfort food paradise. She described David's mac and cheese as the kind of dish that makes you understand why food can be love, and called Dave's Kitchen the kind of Place that reminds you why neighborhood restaurants matter. By noon that day, there was a line outside David's door. His phone rang constantly with people asking for reservations, which was funny because David had never thought his 12-table restaurant would need reservations. Local news picked up Amanda's story. Social media posts about the Dishwasher's restaurant started going viral. Within a week, David had to hire help. Carlos, hearing about David's success through the restaurant gossip network, showed up on a Thursday evening. "You need a prep cook," Carlos said simply. "I heard about what's happening here. Tony's will survive without me, but you need someone who knows what they're doing." David hired him on the spot. Late that night, after they had served their biggest day ever, 47 customers in a 12-table restaurant, David and Carlos sat exhausted in the tiny kitchen. "You know what this means?" Carlos asked, cleaning his knife for the dozenth time that day. "That we need more tables. That you were right. About all of it. The food, the business, everything." David pulled out his phone to check social media mentions of the restaurant. In between the positive reviews and photos of happy customers, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. Lisa had shared Amanda's article on her Facebook page. She hadn't written anything, just shared it. But for David, it was enough. She was watching. She was seeing what he had built from nothing, what he had created when everyone, including her, thought he would fail. David looked around his tiny, chaotic, wonderfully successful restaurant and smiled. He was no longer just a dishwasher. He was a business owner, an entrepreneur, and for the first time in his life, he was exactly who he wanted to be. 6 months after the viral food blog review, David stood in the middle of his second restaurant location, watching contractors install the last of the kitchen equipment. The space was 3 times larger than his original Dave's Kitchen, with room for 40 customers and a proper kitchen where his cooks wouldn't bump into each other every 5 minutes. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" Carlos said, joining him near the new industrial dishwashing station. 6 months ago you were washing dishes at Tony's, now look at this place." David nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the next challenge. "We need to hire 12 more people before we open next week. And I want to make sure everyone understands how we do things." That had become David's obsession. Not just expanding, but expanding the right way. Every employee at Dave's Kitchen learned the same lesson David had learned as a dishwasher. Every position mattered, and everyone needed to understand how their job connected to the customer's experience. When he interviewed potential servers, David didn't just ask about their experience taking orders. He asked them to spend an hour washing dishes, then explain what they learned about how the kitchen operated. When he hired cooks, he made them work a shift as a busser first, so they understood how long it took to clean tables and what happened when food took too long to prepare. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" David asked Carlos as they watched a new hire struggling with the pace of dishwashing during his training shift. "Maybe a little," Carlos admitted. "But it works. Our staff turnover is practically zero, and everyone works together like they've been here for years instead of months." The numbers proved Carlos right. Dave's Kitchen had become profitable within 3 months, something that shocked David's accountant. Most restaurants took at least a year to turn a profit if they ever did. But David's approach was different. Because he understood every aspect of the operation, he could spot problems before they became expensive disasters. When food costs started creeping up at the original location, David noticed because he still helped with inventory every week. When customer wait times increased, he saw it because he made a point of working every position at least once a month. When employees seemed unhappy, he knew because he ate lunch with his staff and actually listened to their concerns. The success brought unexpected attention. Local business newspapers wrote articles about the former dishwasher turned restaurateur. Food Network sent a crew to film a segment about Dave's Kitchen for a show about small business success stories. And most surprisingly, investors started calling. "You could have 20 locations within 2 years," said Patricia Williams, a venture capitalist who specialized in restaurant chains. She sat across from David in his tiny office above the original Dave's Kitchen, looking completely out of place in her expensive suit. "We're talking about serious growth. Serious money." David listened as Patricia explained her vision. Professional management, standardized systems, rapid expansion across the Midwest. She threw around numbers that made his head spin. Millions of dollars in investment, hundreds of employees, profits that would make him wealthy beyond anything he had ever imagined. "What do you think?" Patricia asked when she finished her presentation. David looked out the window at the line of customers waiting outside his original restaurant. A year ago, he couldn't have imagined 12 people wanting to eat his food. Now there were 40 people standing on the sidewalk in the Chicago cold waiting for a table. "I think you're probably right about the money," David said slowly. "But I need to understand something. If we expand that fast, how do I make sure every restaurant maintains the same quality? How do I train managers to care about the business the way I do?" Patricia looked surprised by the question. "We hire experienced restaurant managers, people who know how to run operations efficiently. But do they know how long it takes to properly clean a commercial grill? Do they understand that if the dishwasher calls in sick, it affects every other position in the restaurant? Do they know what it feels like when a customer complains about their food?" "David, you can't personally train every employee in every location. That's not how successful chains work." "Then maybe chains aren't for me," David said. Patricia left without a deal, but her visit planted a seed in David's mind. Maybe he could expand, but do it his own way, slowly and carefully, making sure each location maintained the standards that had made the first one successful. Over the next 18 months, David opened 2 more Dave's Kitchen locations in Chicago neighborhoods that reminded him of where he grew up. Working-class areas where people appreciated good food at reasonable prices. Each restaurant was profitable within 6 months. Each maintained the same culture of respect and teamwork that had made the original special. Food magazines started calling Dave's Kitchen a phenomenon. Business schools invited David to speak about his unconventional management approach. The mayor of Chicago even stopped by for dinner and a photo opportunity. But the call that surprised David most came on a Tuesday evening while he was working the grill at his newest location. "David? It's Lisa." He hadn't heard her voice in almost 2 years. David stepped away from the grill and walked to his office, closing the door behind him. "Hi, Lisa. How are you?" "I'm okay. I saw the article about you in Chicago Magazine, the one where they called you one of the city's most successful young entrepreneurs." David sat down at his desk, unsure what to say. The magazine article had included photos of all 4 restaurant locations and mentioned that Dave's Kitchen was now valued at over $2 million. That's incredible, David. I mean, really incredible. I'm proud of you." "Thank you." There was a long pause. David could hear the sounds of the restaurant through his office door. Customers laughing. Servers calling out orders, the normal chaos of a busy dinner service. "I was wondering," Lisa continued, "if maybe we could have dinner sometime to talk. I know I have a lot to apologize for, and I'd like the chance to do that properly." David thought about all the nights he had imagined this conversation. In his fantasies, he was coldly triumphant, making Lisa understand how wrong she had been about him. But now, hearing the vulnerability in her voice, he felt something different. Not anger, but sadness for all the time they had lost. "Lisa, I appreciate you calling. I really do. But I'm not the same person you were married to. I know that. I can see that. That's why I want to talk." "The thing is," David said gently, "I've learned that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about becoming who you're supposed to be, regardless of what anyone else thinks." "What does that mean?" David looked around his office at the photos on the wall, his staff at company parties, customers celebrating birthdays at Dave's Kitchen, the newspaper clippings that documented his journey from dishwasher to business owner. "It means I'm not angry anymore, Lisa. I'm grateful. If you hadn't pushed me to change my life, I might have stayed a dishwasher forever. I might never have discovered what I was capable of. So you'll have dinner with me?" "I don't think that's a good idea. We're different people now, living different lives. I hope you find happiness, I really do. But I think we both need to keep moving forward, not backward." After David hung up, he sat in his office for a few minutes, processing the conversation. 2 years ago, a call from Lisa would have sent him into an emotional spiral. Now he felt peaceful, complete. Carlos knocked on his office door. "Hey boss, we need you out here. The evening rush is picking up and table 6 wants to compliment the chef personally." David smiled and stood up. "Boss." He still wasn't used to that title, but it fit better every day. Walking back into his restaurant, David saw his reflection in the kitchen's stainless steel surfaces. He was 35 years old, successful beyond his wildest dreams, respected by his employees and his community. More importantly, he was happy. The customer at table 6 was an elderly woman celebrating her anniversary with her husband. She wanted to thank David for the best meal she'd had in years. "Young man," she said, shaking his hand, "whatever you're doing here, keep doing it. This place has soul." As David walked back to the kitchen, he thought about her words. Soul. That was exactly what he had been trying to build from the beginning. Not just a business, but a place that mattered to people. A place where everyone, from the dishwasher to the owner, was valued and respected. Looking around at his staff working together like a well-oiled machine, David realized he had accomplished something more important than just financial success. He had created the kind of workplace he had always wished he could be part of when he was washing dishes and dreaming of something better. And this was only the beginning. 5 years after opening his first restaurant, David stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, wearing a suit that fit him perfectly but still felt strange after years in kitchen whites. Around him, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions as the opening bell prepared to ring for Dave's Kitchen Inc. "How does it feel to go from washing dishes to ringing the opening bell?" a journalist called out. David smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. 57 Dave's Kitchen locations across 12 states, over 4,000 employees. And in about 30 seconds, he would officially become a billionaire. "It feels like the beginning, not the end," David replied, his hand resting on the bell. "We're just getting started." The bell rang and Dave's Kitchen stock opened at $42 per share. By the end of the trading day, it had reached $68, making David's stake worth over $1.2 billion on paper. The former dishwasher from Chicago was now one of the youngest billionaires in America, but David barely paid attention to the stock price. He was already thinking about his next project, something that mattered more to him than any amount of money. 6 months later, David stood in front of a room full of restaurant workers in Detroit, announcing the launch of the Second Chance Foundation. The foundation would provide small business loans and mentorship to anyone working in the food service industry who had dreams of starting their own restaurant. "I know what it's like to have people look at you and see just a dishwasher or just a busboy or just a server," David told the crowd. "But I also know that some of the most innovative, hardworking, creative people in the world are working in restaurant kitchens right now, dreaming of something bigger." The foundation's first loan went to Maria Santos, a single mother who had been working double shifts as a prep cook for 6 years while developing recipes for what she hoped would become her own taco truck. The second went to James Park, a former server who wanted to open a Korean-American fusion restaurant in his hometown of Nashville. Within its first year, the Second Chance Foundation had helped launch 43 new restaurants across the country. The success rate was remarkable. Over 90% of the businesses were still operating and profitable after 18 months, far higher than the industry average. David's success story became a case study in business schools and the subject of a best-selling book called From the Dish Pit to the Boardroom. He appeared on magazine covers and was invited to speak at conferences around the world. But the moment that meant the most to him happened on a quiet Tuesday evening in Chicago. David was visiting the original Dave's Kitchen, working a shift on the line just to stay connected to where it all began, when he heard a familiar voice from the dining room. "Excuse me, is the owner available? I'd like to speak with him." David looked through the kitchen window and saw Tony Benedetti, the man who had owned Tony's Italian Kitchen, where David had washed dishes for 3 years. Tony looked older, grayer, but his voice was unmistakable. David washed his hands and walked out to the dining room, trying to keep his expression neutral. Tony stood near the host station, looking nervous and out of place in his worn coat and old shoes. "Hello, Tony." Tony's eyes widened with recognition, then filled with something that looked like shame. "David, I heard about what you've accomplished. All of this." He gestured around the bustling restaurant. "I wanted to congratulate you personally. Thank you. That means a lot. I also wanted to apologize," Tony continued, his voice getting quieter. "I never saw your potential when you worked for me. I treated you like you were invisible, like washing dishes was all you'd ever be good for. I was wrong." David studied Tony's face, remembering all the nights he had cleaned dishes while dreaming of something more, while Tony barely acknowledged his existence. He could have been bitter. He could have turned Tony away or made him feel small the way David had felt small for so many years. Instead, David smiled. "Tony, would you like to have dinner?" "On the house." As Tony ate, David sat across from him, listening to stories about how Tony's Italian kitchen had struggled after David left. How several dishwashers had come and gone, none with David's work ethic and attention to detail. "You know," Tony said, cutting into his chicken parmesan, "I've been thinking about retiring, selling the restaurant, but I don't know what I'd do with myself." David leaned forward. "What would you say to managing one of our suburban locations? We need someone with experience who understands what it takes to run a neighborhood restaurant." Tony looked up in surprise. "You'd hire me?" "After how I treated you. Tony, I learned some of my most important lessons working for you. I learned that every employee deserves respect no matter what their job title is. I learned that because you taught me what it felt like not to have that respect." Tony's eyes filled with tears. "David, I don't deserve this kind of generosity. It's not about deserving it. It's about second chances." 2 months later, Tony was successfully managing Dave's Kitchen Westtown, bringing his decades of restaurant experience to help train new managers. He became one of David's most effective leaders, perhaps because he understood what it meant to fail and get back up. The success of Dave's Kitchen continued to accelerate. By the end of David's 6th year in business, he had 96 locations and was planning 4 more that would bring him to exactly 100 restaurants, a number that felt significant. Like reaching the summit of a mountain he had started climbing in a dish pit. The milestone prompted another wave of media attention. News crews followed David for a documentary about his rise from dishwasher to billionaire. During filming, a producer asked him about Lisa, his ex-wife who had mocked his ambitions years earlier. "Do you ever wonder what she thinks about your success now?" David considered the question. "I hope she's happy. I hope she learned the same thing I did, that you can't build your life around other people's opinions of you." But privately, David did wonder. He had heard through mutual friends that Lisa had gotten divorced again, that she had struggled to find stability after leaving her job at the insurance company. Part of him felt sad for her, remembering the woman he had fallen in love with before bitterness and disappointment had poisoned their marriage. The answer to his wondering came in an unexpected way. 3 weeks before the grand opening of Dave's Kitchen's 100th location in downtown Chicago, David received a handwritten letter with no return address. He recognized Lisa's handwriting immediately. "David," the letter began, "I'm watching you on the news right now, cutting the ribbon at your 99th restaurant. The reporter just mentioned that you're about to become the youngest person to own 100 restaurants in America. I had to write this letter because I need you to know something. I was wrong about everything, not just about your potential, but about what success actually means. I thought success was about impressing other people, about having the right job title and making enough money to buy things that would make me look successful. But watching you now, I understand that real success is about becoming the person you're meant to be. You didn't prove me wrong, David. You proved yourself right, and that's so much more powerful. I'm proud of you, not because you're rich or famous, but because you stayed kind, because you hire people like Tony and give them second chances, because you remember where you came from and you use your success to help other people who are where you used to be. I don't expect you to forgive me or want to see me. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost when I walked away from you. It wasn't a dishwasher. It was a man with a heart big enough to change the world, one restaurant at a time. Congratulations on everything you've built. You deserve all of it." David read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer. He felt a sense of closure that he hadn't expected, not because Lisa had apologized, but because her words confirmed something he had learned over the past 6 years. The opinions of people who couldn't see your potential don't matter. The only opinion that matters is your own, and what you choose to do with the potential you know you have. The grand opening of Dave's Kitchen's 100th location was everything David had dreamed it would be. The mayor spoke, the media covered it live, and hundreds of customers lined up to be among the first to eat at the milestone restaurant. As David stood behind the counter of the new location, watching his team work together with the same passion and respect that had defined his company from the beginning, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. 6 years ago, he had been a dishwasher with a dream and a notebook full of ideas. Today, he was a billionaire with 100 restaurants and a foundation that was helping hundreds of other dreamers turn their ideas into reality. But the most important thing hadn't changed. He was still the same person who believed that everyone deserved respect, that hard work could overcome any obstacle, and that success meant lifting others up, not putting them down. The dishwasher had become a billionaire. But more importantly, the man had become who he was always meant to be.